Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate and comment on two stories I found on the podcast Stories Lost. It involves two regular, average families in Scandinavia that had UFO encounters. So one September evening in 1965, Emil and Carlson witnessed an extraordinary aerial vehicle passing at low altitude over their home in Sweden. In the vessel, which had a boat-like shape, stood 20 to 25 people looking down at the couple. And that's basically why I picked this story, because you never hear of a boat-like open-top aerial vehicle as a UFO. It's usually a spherical shape or a cigar shaped. This is the one time that I found a report that had a UAP that very much resembled an open top boat. And on top of that, it was full of people. And these people were looking down at the couple. It was September the 29th, 1965, at about 6:30 p.m. when this happened. Since it was such an astonishing event that they noted some of the details on their calendar. They were on their way across their front yard when their gaze was somehow drawn upward. What struck them was the peculiar shape of the craft, the absence of engine noise, and the fact that it was filled with people looking down at them. It most resembled, in their opinion, the hull of a boat, but without any keel, mast, or other equipment, like an elongated hoe with ends slightly raised. Okay, so it basically looked like that, if you guys have a visual on this. Pretty much like a large boat or an ark with the ends slanted upwards. The size was about that of a bus, and the hull was grayish and quite unattractive. However, the people's clothing was much more colorful. The craft was surrounded by a faint glow, which may have made the whole scene appear so detailed. The craft passed completely silently and at a low altitude diagonally over the Carlsons from south-southeast to north-northwest for a period of 3 minutes. Okay, so that's long enough for them to get a good look at this boat-like UAP. 3 minutes is a long time if you consider what they're looking at. Nothing obstructed the view of the object. The weather was clear, calm, and nearly cloudless. So, okay, there were no cloud obstructions. It was a clear sky. Emil Carlson recalled that if he tried to compare the altitude with the church tower there in Aroga, the airship was about 50 meters higher than the church tower is. So around 60 meters, he estimated. 60 meters, or approximately 196 feet above them. That's low enough for them to get a pretty good look, I'd say. It couldn't have been higher or farther away, as they could clearly see so many details. That's why they were so struck by the absence of any engine noise, as it passed so close by. There were no neighbors within earshot that they could call out to, and they couldn't leave to tell others about the phenomenon. They just stood there watching the strange vessel and wondering what would happen with the craft that had 20 to 25 beings. They stood close together looking up, and they could only see the upper bodies of these people. Here's a close-up look at what they saw, if you guys can see this. About 20, 25 human-looking beings staring down at them with very colorful clothing. Their faces were like those of ordinary folks, they said. The odd thing was their clothing, which was as colorful as the rainbow. The style of the clothing reminded them of modern rainwear. So I guess it was plastic-like and shiny. And it had very bright colors. Emil said that when the craft was directly above them, they could see its full width with all the people inside it slowly move toward the north-northwest. As it moved away from their direction, the back end, so to speak, turned toward them, and it didn't vanish suddenly, but drifted off at a slow and steady pace. So, yeah, it's moving pretty slowly. It's almost as though it wanted to be seen. In total, the Carlsons estimated that they saw it for about 3 minutes, and they said it didn't look like a flying saucer. Maybe it was some kind of tourist from another world. They felt relieved when it passed without landing, as it was quite unsettling. So, were these tourists from another world? Were these beings on a galactic tour? Okay, so were these tourists, travelers, or scientists that the Carlson couple saw up in the sky? These ETs did not have the same level of engagement or intention as we usually hear in usual UFO reports. There was no attempt at abduction, no attempt to land or collect any samples of soil. It actually sounds more like a detached and managed tour, like the type you would get if you went to another country and you were on vacation and had a guided tour. You don't really engage with the locals. You just sort of stare at them and go by on your vehicle, whether it be a bus, a UFO, or a boat floating by in the sky. The same experience, basically. It's basically mass tourism, is what it sounds like. I'd like to move on now with another very unique Scandinavian UFO report, which happened in Finland. And this one was reported by the famous Finnish ufologist Tapani Kuningas. This report actually inspired him to become a ufologist. He included this story that I'm about to relate in his book, UFOs in the Finnish Sky. Okay, so Tapani himself openly admits that he had never seen a UFO or ETs, but he came very close to seeing one while he was an adolescent, and he was picking berries with his family. The incident took place in Lamaki, Finland, on August the 19th, 1965, around 12 p.m. That beautiful late summer day, they set out to pick blueberries in a forest near the village of Wherein in Lamaki, Finland. There were 4 of them, his father, his mother, and his brother, and Tapani himself. Tapani says he doesn't remember seeing or hearing anything unusual, even though at the time he was very close to his brother, who experienced this event for about half an hour and never said a word about it, not till much later. So I guess Tapani and his mother, which didn't see anything as well, were concentrating on picking berries and weren't looking around them or weren't paying much attention to their surroundings. They focused solely on collecting berries. There was also a strange stone that was also seen in the forest by the father and the brother, something that had never been noticed in that place before, nor after the event. So Tapani's father, whose name was Michael Kuningas, and who was 55 at the time, described this peculiar stone. They described this peculiar stone as a bit odd. It caught the father and brother's attention immediately. There was no stone like it there before, and they almost felt as though it was alive. Somehow it stood out for them. They approached it slowly until it was about 30 meters away. 30 meters, or approximately 98 feet away. The stone was covered with moss, and there was a small rowan tree on top, swaying slightly in the wind. Otherwise, this stone stood out from normal stones as it had a greener hue, maybe even more so than typical forest stones. It was about half a meter high and a bit over a meter long, so about 2.5 feet high and 3 feet long. Then a breeze came to that spot, and there was a sound of trembling aspen leaves, even though there were no aspens there. The air was calm and warm for an August midday. After a moment, a green man appeared. He came from near the stone and walked past the brother and father without looking at them. And as he passed, he muttered to himself, "Oh, oh," repeating it quite often. He was about a meter or 3 feet tall. They wondered what this boy was doing, running around and groaning. He was dressed as if in a protective suit, green in color. He had a pointed head on his head. They didn't notice any footwear as separate pieces, but the suit seemed to be a single unit made of the same material from top to bottom. Then he suddenly turned in their direction, changed his running path, and came closer. He looked directly at them, right in the eyes. He was now very close, only about 15 meters away. 15 meters, or approximately 49 feet away. For a brief moment, he stared at them, and they could see his face. His face was almost like a regular human face, but he looked younger in some ways, though his expression made him seem older. He didn't look like a child at all. His face had a strong carrot orange tint to it. As he watched them intently for what felt like a minute, then he turned around and started running away. About 50 meters away, 50 meters or approximately 164 feet away, he disappeared from sight. The way he vanished was quite odd. It was like he somersaulted backward and was suddenly gone. Tapani's brother had a slightly different description of what happened. Later on, after he told Tapani about this years later, because he had kept it a secret. So at 31 years old, he said there was a strong wind in one spot on the hill, about 200 meters away. 200 meters, or approximately 656 feet away, trees were swaying violently in that place. It was like a small whirlwind. The brother said he was puzzled. So to me, that sounds like a craft, possibly the big stone that they had observed was some sort of UAP, and the landing caused this whirlwind. So the brother was puzzled by this whirlwind that was blowing so hard, especially on such a clear day. He checked the time, and it was about 2:30 in the afternoon, and he thought there was something strange going on. Then the wind stopped all of a sudden. There was no visible change, but then he started to hear what sounded like a human voice talking. He couldn't make out any words. After a while, the voice stopped. He continued to pick berries, but kept glancing in the direction he had heard the voices from, wondering if there was anything unusual. Then he noticed a strange stone, the stone that was mentioned earlier, about 2.5 meters high and 3 or 4 meters in diameter. Next to the stone stood a small man, just a couple of meters from the stone. He said he looked in his direction and seemed to look down, strangely enough, towards him and his father from behind the stone. He seemed to be about chest height to the brother and had something resembling a box. Okay, so this was something that wasn't told in the original story. The brother has more details to tell. There was some sort of a box he had on his uniform. It was a box or something smaller on his chest. Then he started walking directly towards the brother and father, and they thought he was coming right towards them. He got to about 50 meters away and then changed direction. He was walking briskly or even jogging. He was wearing a green suit. His skin was reddish, like a carrot, and his feet looked black. They appeared to be a meter high in length. His head was quite large, and his ears were wide. He ran towards the edge of the swamp and disappeared there in a strange way. When he came closer, the brother saw something flash. When he was nearby, but couldn't look in his direction, a strange force was there. At the moment, he ran towards the swamp edge and disappeared. Okay, so there was a strong flash. Somehow that box somehow made him disappear, in my opinion. The brother felt like he wanted to go and look, but he couldn't move at all. He was paralyzed. His brain was working fine, but he was just frozen there. He could smell something strange, as if there nearby for a long time there were odd sounds coming from above him. But soon the figure was no longer visible. The phenomenon had lasted about half an hour and then vanished around 2:30. Around 2:30, about half an hour later, as the brother was preparing to leave, he began thinking about the incident and felt that he should go back and take another look at the stone. He crouched down, but saw no signs or footprints or paths or even marks. He wondered if that rock might not be natural, even though it had all the characteristics of an ordinary rock. It was grayish with moss and a small rowan bush growing on top. He looked around and he saw that there were no blueberries picked from the ground. That rock felt suspicious to him all the time, like maybe he should approach it and see what it really was. But when he started towards it, some very strange force turned him in a different direction, oddly enough. Wow. So something from that rock or something from within the rock repelled the brother away from the rock. That's one powerful force. That strange force turned the brother in a different direction. He had to step away from the rock. Then he thought maybe he should just leave it alone. But he couldn't do that either. He thought it was best to say something about this encounter to the others. But he soon forgot everything. When he was back at the car, he dismissed it from his mind and went home, looked at the date, and it was the 19th. The event stayed on his mind for some reason, and he didn't tell anyone that day. Simply passed, and Tapani remained none the wiser, the author of this story. He actually included this in his book, UFOs in the Finished Sky. However, the time eventually came when his brother finally opened up to Tapani, and about half a year later, his brother told Tapani about the incident he had and thought that no one else had seen the humanoid. However, it turned out that the father had also observed the same events, but for some reason he hadn't mentioned anything about it before, neither to his mother nor to anyone else. So this encounter actually sparked Tapani Kaningas's lifelong interest in the UFO phenomenon. He went on to write UFOs in the Finished Sky, which includes this very same story that inspired him. It's interesting that the whole family went out blueberry picking. The encounter manifested itself to just the father and the brother. Tapani himself and the mother were not witnesses to this experience. And the brother kept it a secret for at least a few years before actually telling Tapani what he and his father witnessed. And it was interesting because he added a lot of detail, like the box that the 3-foot ET had on his chest, the fact that he had a big head with wide ears. He also mentioned that the entire experience lasted a half an hour. That's a long time for the mother and Tapani to be nearby and not realize what was going on. It's incredible that the mother and Tapani didn't experience any of this. Why is it that only the brother and the father saw this encounter while Tapani and the mother were so nearby? That's very interesting. None of them, except maybe Tapani Kaningas, went on to write a book and possibly get some sort of monetary gain from this. But the Carlsons from the first story that we went over in Sweden certainly didn't go on to write a book, and they were just as respectable as the Tapanis, well respected in their communities. They had not much to gain. I like stories like this because it's down to earth. People have nothing to gain. They have an extraordinary experience and they relate this. What both incidents have in common is that they were both regular people, regular families, well respected within their community, not known for fabricating stories about aliens. They just saw something bizarre that they couldn't explain, and they shared it without any need for attention or monetary gain. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of those two Scandinavian UFO encounters. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my podcast.